We're so glad you're here for the launch of LCV's 2020 National Environmental Scorecard. Before we jump in, I do want to say that our hearts are with the Texas communities, especially the communities of color and the low wealth communities that are hurting the most, that have been hit so hard by the extreme weather conditions that are fueled by the climate crisis. I also want to note how different the world looks today than when we released our 2019 scorecard a year ago. And so does our new scorecard, which focuses on the vastly different approaches that Speaker Pelosi and the House and the then McConnell-led Senate took on environmental progress and on the four interwoven crises plaguing our nation: the coronavirus pandemic, economic inequality, racial injustice, and climate change. While the challenges we face are massive, we are thrilled that there is now a pro-environment trifecta led by President Biden and Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, and now Majority Leader Schumer. This trifecta is poised to enact transformational climate progress that results in healthy, equitable, safe communities that are powered by clean energy. Our Legislative Director, Matthew Davis, will discuss the scorecard in more detail after we hear from our congressional champions, and then we'll take questions at the end. You can ask questions through the call by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll call on attendees to ask your question at the end of this. But first, I am delighted to thank Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senator Cory Booker, and Chair Kathy Castor for their tireless leadership for the environment and public health, and for joining us today. And I'm checking if we've been joined by Leader Schumer. So we're going to first kick things off with Senator Cory Booker, who of course needs no introduction, but I will say that he is such an important environmental leader in the Senate. He's earned 100% on the 2020 scorecard. He's a leader on critically important legislation that would force corporate polluters to pay for the cleanup of contaminated Superfund sites. He sponsored the landmark Environmental Justice Act. He was an original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal and so much more. Senator, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your leadership.
Are you kidding me? Thank you for that very generous introduction. I am happy to be Chuck Schumer's warm-up act anytime that you all want me to, although he's a little jealous that his small state sits in the shadow of New Jersey. But I'm proud to be one of his team members in the United States Senate. And look, I love the League of Conservation Voters. You have empowered me to be a better senator. You have provided guidance on legislation, incredibly valuable input, counsel, and even mentorship as I made my transition from being a mayor to being a United States Senator. And so I'm so grateful to be with you in community right now. And we know that this is an exciting time, as you so perfectly spelled out. We have leaders positioned so well to act with the urgency that this moment in American history demands, and global history. We are at a moment where I know we will see bold ambitions put forward in policy, transitioning off of fossil fuels, electrifying our transportation sector, investing heavily in natural climate solutions that will actually empower farmers, that will actually create hundreds and hundreds of thousands of jobs as America tries to lead the planet out of a crisis that cannot be achieved without American leadership. What I would like to just take a moment to talk to you about is maybe a snapshot of a personal journey. In 1969, my parents, a Black family coming from the South, moved to New Jersey. And what my parents encountered right away was real estate discrimination. Places would not sell homes to a Black family. My parents literally, through the Fair Housing Council, had white couples volunteering to pose as my parents, who after being turned away from a house, the white couple would find out the house was still for sale and put a bid on the house that my family would have actually eventually grow up in. So I grew up in an affluent white suburbia, and I had this incredible natural environment. We planted in my backyard and grew tomatoes and zucchini. My parents never worried about the water I was drinking out of my faucet and the air that I was breathing in my community. That was the first half of my life. Coming out of law school, though, I moved into the neighborhood I live in right now. It is a place where we don't mistake wealth with worth. I was blessed here. I got my BA from Stanford, but my PhD from the streets of Newark, and some of the greatest leaders and professors of my life live right here. And I moved into a high-rise public housing project for about a decade of my life, right up the street from where I'm sitting right now. And in this majority Black city, in this majority Black community, and a community where, according to the last census, the median income is about $14,000 per household, I encountered stunning reality, which was the profound environmental injustice that exists for low-income communities and communities of color. We are in a city right now where people in the past could fish in the river for food, or they could play there, but now it is a disaster where we have people that are living around Superfund sites that are threatened with lead poisoning, being threatened by toxic air, where the asthma rates in the community I sit are 4 times higher than the suburbs that I grew up in. And this is unbelievable, especially because we know from the lead drinking problems we have in this, lead water drinking problems we have in this country, that have 3,000 jurisdictions that have more than twice the blood lead levels of Flint, Michigan, to the respiratory challenges, to even Superfund sites, that the longitudinal data, if you live around a toxic site, you have 20% higher rates of birth defects, 20% higher rates of autism. And we know the #1 indicator in America of whether you live around toxic sites, whether you drink dirty water or breathe dirty air, is the color of your skin. And I've traveled around this country and seen communities that are suffering in the same way that Newark is, whether it's a place called Cancer Alley along the Mississippi River, or even outrageous realities that are being caused by industrial factory farming in places like Duplin County, North Carolina, where I sat with Black communities that have unbelievable respiratory diseases, can't run their air conditioners, open their windows, or even put their clothing on the line. And so I want you to know that for me, I'm almost regretful that I didn't feel the urgency of these issues living in suburbia. But we are a part of a movement where the suffering of others must be central to our own sense of purpose. That if our children were living in these communities, we must act with the same sense of urgency around issues of injustice, because King was right. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so I am grateful to be in partnership with this amazing organization who understands that environmental injustice must be a central pillar of our purpose. That you cannot talk about solving the problem of climate change without dealing with the urgency, the fierce urgency of environmental injustice that is plaguing communities all around our nation. Right now, our children are being poisoned. The breast cancer rates, the respiratory diseases, we can go through the issues that are facing communities of color because of this toxicity. So I introduced the Environmental Justice Legacy Pollution Cleanup Act, which would invest tens of billions of dollars to clean up Superfund sites, to replace lead service lines, to deal with abandoned coal mines, hard rock mines, and more of the legacy pollutions from former defense sites. The bill would put $10 billion specifically for the lead problems we have in our country, and could eliminate this problem of lead service lines. The bill would make investments so that everyone in our country has the kind of plumbing, running water, functioning bathrooms, wastewater disposal that we should have in the richest nation on the planet. As extreme weather from climate change continues to intensify, the harm from these legacy pollution sites will get worse and worse and worse. And these dirty industries that produce things like CAFOs will continue to actually increase their threat to drinking water, groundwater, and more. We must act urgently, boldly, when it comes to climate change and a comprehensive climate bill. But we have to have that same urgency to deal with environmental injustice and how it faces vulnerable communities. I live in a neighborhood where up the street we created, in this food desert, a whole city block of a farm. And I remember being excited that my children in Newark would have the same experience I had, planting tomatoes, growing zucchini. Children that grow kale, eat kale, I found out. But I will never forget the moment when a guy who's on my Senate staff now, who was then the head of all economic development in the United States, came to me and said, the state EPA came in and won't let us plant in the soil. We have to get a city's blocks worth of planter boxes because the soil is so toxic with heavy metals like lead. It is unconscionable to live in a country where children who are low income and minority don't have the same birthright that every American should have: clean air, clean water, and clean soil. This is, to me, a part of the cause of our country. And I'm grateful to be with you in the movement of justice that has to be central to our legislative agenda in this Congress. And I'm grateful for my partners in the House and the Senate, two of whom you're going to hear from now. And I just want to say, God bless this organization. Let us continue the work.
Thank you so much, Senator Booker, for your powerful words. Thank you for your incredible leadership. We are so grateful. And now I am thrilled to get to introduce our next speaker, who of course also needs no introduction, but it is really exciting to be able to say Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who also earned a perfect score of 100% on the 2020 National Environmental Scorecard, is deeply committed to climate solutions, to environmental justice that Senator Booker just spoke so powerfully about, to clean energy jobs. And he really speaks so well to the importance of addressing all of these together for his grandson, Noah, and for all of our children. And Senator Schumer is leading efforts to transition all US vehicles to zero emissions, to shift our economy to run on 100% clean energy. He's a leader on the Thrive resolution and so much more. And again, we just could not be more excited that he is now the majority leader, and we're so glad that he has joined us today. Thank you, Senator Schumer.
Well, thank you, Tiernan. Thanks for the great work you do. And to all of you at the League of Conservation Voters, I love the scorecard because I always get a good score. And I want to preview my speech. It will be almost as good as Cory Booker's, which is a very high compliment. So thank you all. And Cory's one of our great advocates on environmental issues and so many other issues. And I'm so glad that you've had him as part of this little Zoom. And I know you have to go, Cory, so you don't have to sit here and have to listen to me prattle on here when you have many important things to do. So thank you. And I see Kathy Castor there. Thank you for your great work in the House. Your committee set a good an example, and we have a great climate crisis committee as well, led by Brian Schatz. And thank you for your good work. I see that nice picture of Miami behind you. Is that Miami?
Tampa.
Tampa. Okay, well, they won. You have a good team. And the owner is a good Democrat. So that's good too. Okay, let me go forward here. First, I do believe that the League of Conservation Voters, and I say this regularly here, there, and everywhere to my colleagues, it's one of the most effective organizations out there, and they just know how to get things done to make our planet greener and safer and healthier. And one of the things that makes them effective is their scorecard. I don't know if you mentioned it, Tiernan. How long has the scorecard been going?
Thank you for asking. We've been putting it out for our entire existence, which is now 50 years. So quite some.
50 years, isn't that great? Almost as, I'm almost as old as your scorecard.
Not even close.
We need organizations like LCV to keep a close watch on members of Congress, hold them accountable, and make it easy for the public to understand. You know, if you ask people to follow each bill and how people vote, it'd be a lot harder than with the scorecard. And one thing we know, the environment should not be a partisan issue. Public health, science should not be partisan. Climate change should not be partisan. It's our globe, we're all on it. We all see what's happening to it. We all feel what's happening to it. But of course, when we look at the scorecard, the data speaks for itself. For too many members of the Republican Party have decided to turn away from science and the environment. Instead, support the interest of polluters and people like that. In the face of climate change, their record's even worse. And I think Donald Trump made it worse still with his just disdain for science. And he's, you know, that's like being a Luddite or somebody who in the 18th century believed that the sun still ran around the earth. It's crazy. Anyway, as majority leader, as you all know, I plan to make the fight against climate change a top priority. We need bold action to tackle the crisis. We needed it yesterday. That's why I supported the Thrive Agenda. It represents a bold blueprint for climate action that's centered around the well-being of people. It calls for tackling climate change, tackling economic inequality, and racial injustice at the same time. So as that we tackle the climate crisis, we also help communities that have been left behind in major economic transitions. I'm confident that working alongside President Biden and House Democrats, we can pass an economic recovery bill that reflects these principles of the Thrive Agenda. We're going to reduce emissions by making clean energy and clean cars more affordable. You mentioned that, Tiernan. I'm so into that, accessible to everyone. Joe Biden was nice enough to put my Clean Cars for America proposal, the one I've done with Senator Stabenow, into his Build Back Better. So we have high hopes for it, and it will be huge in what it can do. And we're going to create, while we do all this, and this is a great thing, we're going to create millions of good jobs in infrastructure, manufacturing, and regenerative agriculture, especially in communities that need the jobs the most. And tying together fighting for a clean, green earth and new, good, clean, green jobs is a great thing. It will produce many jobs. And that's why on Clean Cars for America, we were able to get the UAW and the IPEW and the AFL-CIO to support it, which is a wonderful thing. So we got a big challenge ahead of us. One thing I know as we take on this challenge, LCV will be right there fighting for bold climate action, keeping senators accountable, putting out their scorecard, and doing all the good things they do. So thank you, LCV. I'm proud to have received a good rating, 100%. I guess that's pretty good.
Perfect.
A good rating on the scorecard, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Majority Leader Schumer. We promise to do all of that. We're with you at every step and look forward to making huge progress in the weeks and months to come. So thank you. And now I'm especially pleased to get to introduce our final congressional champion, Chair Kathy Castor from the great state of Florida. And she, as people know, is the chair of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, which put forward a truly excellent, extremely thorough roadmap for climate action that centers environmental justice, good paying jobs as we transition to a clean energy economy once and for all. She's such a champion for Florida's coasts and for so much more. She also earned a perfect score of 100% on the 2020 scorecard, and we're thrilled to have you with us today. Chair Castor, thank you.
Hey, Tiernan, and everyone in the LCV family, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today. And Tiernan, thank you for starting your opening with a mention of the families and workers who are suffering in Texas. My heart goes out to them, and we have a lot of work to do to modernize our grid and make it more resilient to climate, but to take care of the families on the front lines, the most vulnerable. So it was especially important to hear Senator Booker's remarks. He has been a champion for environmental justice. And of course, Leader Schumer gives us all great hope with new action in the United States Senate, especially kudos to him for his Clean Cars initiative. But I think we have to reflect for a minute. LCV is there year in, year out to hold Congress accountable. It's needed. The public craves this kind of information. And when you think about 2020, thank goodness it's in the rearview mirror. It was a very difficult year, but we did make progress on public health and environmental protection and environmental justice. We had some important victories in Congress, but it was not easy standing up time and again to the Trump administration and their harmful policies. Trump and his toxic team, I call them, they were at it until the bitter end. And it required all of us across this country standing up and speaking out to hold them accountable. But now with President Biden in the White House, we have a real opportunity. We are ready to move forward with urgency. to put Americans back to work in the clean energy economy, to advance public health and environmental justice, and strengthen our communities with resilience and innovation. So 2020 had some important milestones, and thank you very much for mentioning the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, our 500+ page climate roadmap, our climate crisis action plan that now is a foundation for what we need to do to build back better. It will inform President Biden's Build Back Better plan. But I don't want it to be lost on folks that a lot of our policy recommendations were enacted into law already. For example, at the year end, Congress passed bipartisan legislation phasing down the use of HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons. That was in the year end omnibus. We also worked to safeguard public lands through the Great American Outdoors Act, which secured permanent funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. These two measures alone will have an immeasurable impact on working people, families, and our planet and future generations. But we're not stopping there. With President Biden in the White House and our thoughtful colleagues in Congress, we intend to act with urgency. All of these discussions are going on now as we work on crushing COVID-19 and supporting the economic stabilization of families. We have our eye to building back better, making progress that's based on science, and it's built upon a foundation of equity and fair labor standards and opportunities for workers. So LCV, we're stronger because you're with us every step of the way. So thank you for your report card, and I'm going to share it with my mother. I think she'll be very proud.
Well, thank you, Chair Castor. We're glad that your mother is proud of you. We are so proud and so grateful for all that you have helped make happen so far and all the progress that we can all make together in the weeks, months, and years to come. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And now we're going to turn to Matthew Davis, LCV's Legislative Director, to summarize some of the highlights of the 2020 scorecard. So Matthew.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tiernan. And thank you, Chair Castor, Majority Leader Schumer, and Senator Booker for joining us today, and for all of your leadership, especially across this past year with so many challenges. And before we get to reporter questions, I just want to go over some of the key votes and highlights from the 2020 National Environmental Scorecard, which will also be in all of your inboxes immediately following this call, and along with the recording of the event. As you heard from Tiernan at the top, the new scorecard analyzes the vastly different approaches that the House and Senate took on environmental progress and the 4 interwoven crises facing our nation. The 2020 scorecard includes 21 House votes that advanced pro-environment and pro-democracy provisions and government funding. And the House majority leadership scored 100%, while the House minority leadership scored 8%. As you heard from Chair Castor, the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis released their agenda-setting congressional action plan to tackle climate change, and the House acted on some of those, the Select Committee's recommendations last year, including, I think, passing one of the most critical bills, passing the Moving Forward Act, which would advance climate ambitious and resilient transportation, electricity, and water infrastructure, and promote deployment of clean renewable energy. We expected that bill, as Chair Castor does, that bill and the Congressional Action Plan will shape the highly anticipated Build Back Better package. Pro-environment members of the House also paved the way for other vitally important action on climate, democracy, clean drinking water, and environmental justice this year. In stark contrast, instead of delivering much needed relief and reforms last year in the Senate for the 4th year in a row, the majority of the 13 scored votes were in our scorecard were extreme and partisan nominations, both to the federal bench and to the Trump administration. Senator McConnell jammed through 44 lifetime judicial appointments, yet only held votes on 25 bills or resolutions. And the Senate majority, now minority leadership, scored 14%, while the Senate minority and now majority leadership scored 94%. And as we saw play out throughout 2020, and we're seeing in the the horrible situation right now in Texas with the grid and electricity and natural gas problems. The same damaging system, racism, is at the root of COVID-19 vulnerability, climate injustice, environmental injustice, and police brutality. The 2020 scorecard includes votes that reflect our belief that these struggles are intertwined and must be addressed together. For the first time, the 2020 scorecard includes votes on removing public monuments to racism and inadequate policing and criminal justice reform bill, specifically Senate Bill 3985. We did, however, I would want to flag, we did see a glimpse of bipartisanship in 2020 when the House and Senate came together in support of America's best parks program, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, LWCF, and the Great American Outdoors Act was enacted, providing full and permanent funding for LWCF and addressing the long deferred maintenance backlog in our national parks and other public lands. So that was one bright spot in 2020. But overwhelmingly, the story of the second session of the 116th Congress was that the pro-environment House led on taking intersectional action to address the COVID pandemic and also laying the groundwork for transformational investments to build a more just, equitable, and sustainable society. And while the nation suffered, then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell stood in the way of broadly needed progress time and again, instead spent most of the year jamming through extreme and partisan nominations. These highlights hardly skim the surface, so please do take a full look at the full 2020 scorecard at scorecard.lcv.org. And I'm proud to say that our website is now available in both English and Spanish. And with that, we'll open it up to questions. If you have a question, type it in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom, and Tiernan will call on folks. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew. As Matthew said, if you have a question, you can note it in the Q&A. Our first question is from Ali Zaslav. Go ahead, and you should be able to ask your question.
Hi, this is for Leader Schumer. I just want to ask if he's confident about getting enough Republican support on the Democrats' bold climate proposal and if they're considering using reconciliation.
Hi, Ali. This is Tiernan Sittenfeld from LCV. Unfortunately, the members did have to jump off. Matthew and I are happy to answer any questions that any of you would like. But I will say that I have heard him say publicly that he is prepared to use the budget reconciliation process to go big on climate. All right. Do you have a follow-up or?
No, thank you so much.
Okay, great. And then let's see, do we have, I don't think we have other questions in the chat at this point. We'll give another 30 seconds or so in case anyone has another one. We can also we'll pass on to your question to Senator Schumer's office as well. Okay, we do have another question from Zach. Zach, would you like to jump in and ask your question?
Sorry, I think I was muted there for a second. I have just started on the environmental beat here at the Hill, and so I'm still learning the ropes a little. I apologize, but I just wanted to clarify whether the addition of racial justice issues to the scorecard that you mentioned a little while ago is a new development.
Matthew, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yes, thanks for that question, Zach. It is. There have been scored votes related to environmental justice more broadly in past editions of the scorecard, but specifically votes related to racial justice have not typically been in the scorecard, but reflecting our belief that these intertwined crises are needing to be addressed together. We feel like it makes sense to include things like the inadequate policing reform bill that came out of the Senate from Senate leadership, Senate Republican leadership, and removing public monuments to racism from the Capitol, which came out of the House.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. All right, I think that concludes the questions. So we really appreciate all of you joining us today. If anyone is feeling shy and doesn't want to ask their question over Zoom, we're happy to chat with anyone later this afternoon. So again, thank you for joining us. All the information is online. There'll be a press release going out shortly, and we hope you all have a good afternoon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.